Hello and welcome. I am live from Pelham's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pelham's Wasteland Reads for you all, this time covering Memoirs of the Warrior Kumagai. I hope that's about how you say it. It is a Japanese word, so if that's not how you say it, I'll apologize up front for it. Um, Anyway, this is a historical fiction story about Kumagai no Jiro Naozone, who is a figure from actual history, and notably is a figure from one of the very famous sequences from the Tale of the Heike, which is this kind of immense, grand historical epic from the period about the Genpei War, the fall of the Taira clan, and the rise of the Minamoto, and eventually into the Kamakura shogunate back in like the late 12th century, basically. Kumagai Jiro Naozone is one of these figures in a very famous sequence that takes place at the Battle of Ichinotani, and it is one of the I guess very memorable this part of the story that is really deeply filled with kind of pathos and tied to thematically a lot of what the epic version of this story is about. And this book is historical fiction that is sort of a response to that. It is imagined, this is an imagined memoir of Kumagai Naozone, and he, as an older man, has given up his warrior position, is no longer a samurai, and is now a monk, a priest, and he is writing down his memoirs of his life. And part of his reason for doing this is because the mythologized version of the events that he lived through is upsetting to him, basically, that he's frustrated by the way that the young poets who didn't live through the Genpei War are mythologizing the events of history that Kumagai himself lived through. I guess Naozone is his personal name. It's not even his name anymore once he's a priest, because he's taken a new name as a Buddhist priest. But I'm probably going to keep referring to him as Kumagai just because that's the name on the cover, you know. Um, anyway, so this is a really interesting historical fiction about a period that does not get a whole lot of attention in the West, at least. Um, and I have read this book twice now. I read this book the first time a couple of years ago, and then I have read it again just recently and liked it a lot both times. When I first read this book, I hadn't read The Tale of the Heike, but I read the Tuttle Classics translation either last year or the year before, and liked it a lot. Was really kind of fascinated by this thing that is this kind of immense historical epic. And then coming back to this book was really cool because it is about that story in a lot of ways. So I don't think you need to have read The Tale of the Heike in order to kind of understand this book in a lot of ways, but it is a cool addition if you have also read that particular story. But this one is it sort of fits into what I would describe as a general kind of subgenre of historical fiction, which is the kind of demystifying, defantasizing version of historical fiction, something that sort of purports to be what really happened. In this case, it's Kumagai trying to correct rectify a lot of the misconceptions about the period and kind of explain what things were really like in a non-poetic, non-mythologizing way. Um, and he is involved in a number of events kind of all throughout the period. So um, he ends up, he's a young man, I don't remember, 17 or 18, and decides to leave his home. His father died when he was very young, and his mother has died. He's been raised by a family member who doesn't really like him very much, and has been kind of verbally abusive at the very least. And Kumaya decides to leave and seek his fortune and go become a warrior and work for the Taira clan, because Taira Kiyomori is the kind of great leader of that clan, and has been sort of in charge in a lot of ways. He's technically not he's not the emperor or anything like that, but he's a member of this kind of very, very powerful, the leader of this very, very powerful clan, who is in control of a lot of stuff around the capital in Kyoto, and is kind of de facto in control of a lot of the imperial administration, and all of these kind of connections to the kind of official sources of power, if that makes sense. A little bit like, I mean, a number of kind of other historical parallels come to mind. But for instance, Charlemagne's family, the Carolingians, were the mayors of and stewards of the palace, the castellans essentially of the Merovingian palace, and so were connected to authority without yet being kings, and so eventually became kings. In the same way, the Taira are not technically an imperial family, but they are very, very powerful through their connection with the imperial forces and the imperial administration, and have figured out how to like give a lot of appointments to their family members, and amass a lot of wealth and a lot of power and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, and that does not sit well with everyone. Um, Eventually, we end up with a war breaking out, a civil war essentially, between the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan. Um, and Kumagai ends up kind of switching sides back and forth and doing all these different things, and kind of telling this demythologized version of this grand historical epic, where he is presenting his own motives as kind of very mercenary and very opportunistic, and not guided by these kind of grand ideas of loyalty and honor that become really the nature of the mythologized version, and also really central to the new administration's expectation of what it means to be a warrior. And that's one of his big points, is that the kind of way that the story of this period is being told is from the perspective of the kind of lifestyle and kind of values that are expected by the winners of this period, that the Kamakura shogunate under the Minamoto really places a very different emphasis on things like a warrior's kind of modesty, and their undying loyalty to their lord, and their kind of willingness to work with this administration in a way that in the period itself was not really the case, and that the expectations for a warrior were much more about their kind of aggressiveness in battle, their ability to kind of show off and take enemy heads, and kind of demonstrate their prowess in battle by killing powerful enemy officers and lords and all that sort of stuff, and taking their heads, and showing off that they were not just capable warriors, but aggressive warriors, right? And that it wasn't really about like, being a cog in the machine so much as being this kind of standout individual. And that all of that has gone away with time, right? The passage of time has transformed the nature of the warrior so that it is no longer recognizable, and that this is part of what the poets do not understand, basically. Um, and kind of along the way, Kumagai has to wrestle with the way that the mythology of his own exploits in the Genpei War, and particularly him at the Battle of Ichinotani, and he famously encounters and kills a man named Taira Atsumori, who is young and beautiful, and Kumagai is wrestling with what he has done, and in this mythologized version has this kind of grand conversion that in the demythologized version he says is not really true at all, and he was, a flawed man at the time and all that sort of stuff, and all of these ways that this kind of imagined version of history have really eclipsed the real man, and him struggling with that, and trying to define kind of what his own real life and real experiences mean in kind of opposition to the the kind of grand fantastical mythologized this version of himself that is rapidly becoming much more known than his kind of real self, which is, I think, part of why the book is so good, even if you don't really know the the Heike, even if you don't know the story that inspired all of this. I think there is something really touching and fascinating about his struggle with that story, because you essentially are told enough about this particular version of the story to understand what it is like in the Tale of the Heike. And I would say you don't necessarily need to read, the 800 or 1,000 pages that book is in print in order to read this book and understand that this is a man kind of struggling with his legacy in a really interesting way, that also kind of really is very illuminating about this particular historical period, this kind of vanished world that Kumagai is really a part of by the end of the story, and the way that feudal Japan has totally changed in many kind of hard to recognize ways, which is, I think, why this book is really good and really fun, and totally worth checking out if you can find a copy. I think it is not super easy to find a copy of this one. I know Tuttle Publishing, uh, they don't necessarily do a great job of putting a lot of copies of some of their stuff out. But I do know there's a Kindle edition of this, so that's probably the easiest way. That's how I read this one. Um, so yeah, Memoirs of the Warrior Kumagai. It's also not that long. It's like 250 pages. Um, so pretty short and punchy read in a lot of ways. That is really fascinating historical fiction, and totally worth checking out if it sounds interesting to you. And even if it doesn't sound very interesting to you, I would say that this is if I haven't sold it enough yet, let me make kind of one more push to say that I think this is a really good book, and really underread for how good it is, because it's really kind of fascinating and interesting and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that is going to be it for me for today. If you have read Memoirs of the Warrior Kumagai, a historical novel by Donald Richie, or if you've read The Tale of the Heike, or if you're interested in that period of history at all, or whatever else, I don't know, leave a comment down below. Otherwise, that's, yeah, gonna be it. So I've been live from Helm's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.